The first discussion topic on today's Peace and Prosperity is the agenda items of the South Korea-U.S. summit slated for next week. The leaders of South Korea and the U.S. will sit down for the 9th summit talks 3 months after their last meeting in Seoul. They are expected to discuss the restart of negotiations between Pyeongyang and Washington and reaffirm their commitment to the South Korea-U.S. alliance. U.S. President Donald Trump has expressed his discontent with U.S. allies in recent weeks. It remains to be seen how South Korea and the U.S. will narrow the gap in several issues, including the termination of GSOMIA and defense cost sharing. Today's second topic is the future course of working-level talks between North Korea and the United States after U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton's departure. On September 18th, Trump named hostage negotiator Robert O'Brien as his new National Security Advisor to replace Bolton, a well-known hardliner on North Korea. Will North Korea and the U.S. be able to resume working-level talks within this month? How will Bolton's exit affect future dialogue? To shed light on these latest developments, our host, Bong Young-sik, Research Fellow at Yonsei University's Institute for North Korean Studies, is joined by Kim Jina, Research Fellow at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses, in the studio. To broaden the perspective, we also connect with guest experts on Skype, including Karl Friedhoff, a fellow in public opinion and Asia policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and Thomas Countryman, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Nonproliferation.
Hello and welcome to our program. South Korean President Moon Jae-in will travel to the United States next week to sit down with the U.S. President Donald Trump. What will they discuss during their 9th summit talks, and how will the meeting affect future nuclear negotiations between North Korea and the United States? To take a deep dive into these issues, we are joined by Dr. Kim Jina, Research Fellow at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. Welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Donald Trump will have a 9th meeting, and what will be the main issues they're going to discuss?
Well, actually, President Moon attended the UN General Assembly meeting twice already, so it was supposed that Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon would be there to attend the meeting. But President Trump is wishing to have a talk with the DPRK leader, Chairman Kim, and there is talks about resuming working level talks ahead. So, well, before that, I think it is very, very important for the two countries, the U.S. and South Korea, to discuss South Korea's position and concerns about the upcoming talks and potential contribution to denuclearization talks at the same time. So I think when there is a meeting between the U.S. and South Korea, North Korea would be the key issue.
Another issue is that the controversy stirred by U.S. President Donald Trump's remark that the allies in Asia to the United States have been treating the United States, in his own words, worse than anybody else. Mm-hmm. So there is a concern that the defense cost sharing negotiation will be a very tough issue between United States and South Korea.
Right. Actually, it is not the first time that President Trump mentioned that there should be more contribution to the alliance. Actually, the American first, that is the guiding principle for the Trump administration's foreign policy. So, and when it comes to South Korea, SMA Special Measures Agreement is going to expire soon. We have only 3 months window for renegotiation, and the U.S. government's position is it is not going to extend the existing SMA for another 1 year. It wants to have a new deal. So what President Trump is doing these days is, I believe, he's trying to show his determination to ask its allies to think about more burden sharing so that his negotiation team can have a better position in the negotiation.
So the United States will take a very tough stance. Right?
Yes, I think so.
Defense cost-sharing negotiations between South Korea and the United States are likely to be an uphill battle, given the apparent gap in the two countries' positions. we'll take a closer look at the special measures agreement between South Korea and the United States, including previous increase in South Korea's share of defense costs.
Seoul and Washington will start negotiations on their defense cost-sharing pact for 2020 within this month. Since 1991, the two countries have signed Special Measures Agreements, or the SMA, to determine South Korea's share of defense costs for maintaining U.S. troops stationed in the country. South Korea and the U.S. concluded the Status of Forces Agreement, or SOFA, in 1966, under which South Korea provided land and facilities, while the U.S. bore the cost of maintaining U.S. troops in the South. Later, the Allies signed a Special and Exceptional Agreement, the SMA, following U.S. demand that Seoul contribute to the stationing costs for U.S. forces. South Korea's financial contributions have been used to cover the wages for South Korean workers hired by U.S. forces in the country, as well as military construction and logistics support. In 1991, South Korea paid $150 million under the SMA. However, its contributions have seen an increase between 2.5% to 25.7% for each round of negotiations. Back in March 2019, during the 10th round of talks, the Allies agreed on a deal where South Korea pays $869 million. Also, the U.S. asked for the cost-sharing deal to be renewed every year, breaking away from the usual 2 to 5 years of validity. South Korea and the U.S. are now preparing to begin negotiations for 2020. As the talks would come amid increasing pressure from Washington for Seoul to pay more, many expect it will not be easy.
Under this year's agreement, South Korea agreed to pay over $860 million. But United States wants to increase that sixfold, to about $5 billion Do you think this is appropriate or rational?
Well, I think what the U.S. government asked was slightly less than $5 billion. And what we are discussing today is burden sharing, not cost sharing. Cost sharing is about SMA, right? It's about the expenditure for the stationing troops, USFK in the case of the Korean Peninsula. But when it comes to burden sharing, it includes not just the cost sharing, it includes combined defense improvement, overseas operations, and foreign assistance, and many more. So the number is so big because of that.
Because the category is now different. It's not cost sharing, but burden sharing.
Yeah, it's about burden sharing. And look at the history. In 1991, we made SMA in order to bear the cost that was outside the SOFA. And that included labor cost, construction cost, and logistics support. And what we are discussing today is any cost associated with joint military exercises and strategic assets from the U.S. And that's certainly outside the SMA. So we need a new and different platform to discuss this matter. But the thing is, we can actually cut down the price because we can think about expending more on weapons acquisition from the U.S. and also sending more troops as part of the multinational overseas operations.
So it's a different platform.
Yes.
Okay. As always, we now turn to an expert in the United States. We have on the line Mr. Karl Friedhoff, a fellow in public opinion and Asia policy at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Hello.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Good to have you here. The leaders of South Korea and the United States will sit down for their 9th summit talks next week, 3 months after their last meeting in Seoul. What topics do you expect they will discuss this time?
So next on that list, I think they're going to discuss the relationship between Korea and Japan. They're getting into a more troubled downward spiral than we've ever really seen in the recent past. And it's really going to have implications for not only how they deal with North Korea, but how they're going to coordinate on dealing with China over the longer term. So far, the Trump administration has attempted to avoid getting involved in that, but it's getting to a point where I don't think that is feasible. However, President Trump may still try to avoid it, or at least lessen talk about that and shorten them as much as he can. The third thing that they're obviously going to discuss is going to be burden sharing between South Korea and the United States. Those negotiations are now getting underway, and the talks last year were highly contentious, and there's every indication that this year could be even more so. The Trump administration and what it's going to ask for is reportedly $5 billion. That's an increase of 5 times from what South Korea currently pays, and is going to be wholly unacceptable to the South Koreans. The most interesting part to watch is going to see how the South Korean conservatives are going to react to this. In private, there's already been grumbling from many of the security conservatives in South Korea that as an ally of the United States, it should not be treated in this way. And it'll be interesting to see if those private comments then begin to make their way into more public fora, because if that happens, I think there's a real chance that this round of negotiations could do serious damage to South Korean attitudes towards the United States and the alliance.
Let's talk more about the first issue you raised. There have been concerns over the ROK-U.S. alliance following the GSOMIA termination and the military cost-sharing dispute between the two countries. Do you think these concerns are well-founded or can be settled?
So the concerns over the alliance, there's been a long history of some tensions kind of bubbling up here and there. Most recently, we saw that more seriously in 2002, but that's almost 17 years ago. And I think that fundamentally South Korean attitudes towards the United States have changed much for the better in that time. GSOMIA was largely symbolic, in my opinion. It was meant to be the base, and then they were going to build on top of that. So withdrawing from that, was damaging to South Korea, especially among those in Washington, D.C. But I think the bigger issue here is really going to be burden sharing. And that damage, if there is damage to the alliance, it's not going to be so much at the government-to-government level. Certainly those negotiations will be tough, but the fact that they can then bleed over into the public. When these negotiations were done in the past, it was always done on a 5-year cycle. That allowed time for the public to essentially forget about these negotiations, what they meant, how they were ongoing. But now pushing it into a yearly basis means that it's essentially never going to leave the news cycle. It's going to be at the front of the minds for the South Korean public. And when they hear what the ask is, reportedly somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 billion, although I haven't seen solid confirmation of that, I think there's a real risk that the South Korean public could decide or start to lean towards rethinking this alliance more broadly.
Mr. Friedhoff, well, actually, there are some concerns in Washington that the alliance is weakening, especially after President Trump's comments about the possibility that the U.S. allies are taking advantage of the U.S. What do you make of it?
Large majorities of the American public still support defending South Korea if it were invaded by North Korea. The last time we ran a poll on this here at the Chicago Council, that number came out as 58%, down slightly from the previous year, but I think still quite robust considering everything that's happened on the Korean Peninsula. More importantly, we've seen President Trump call repeatedly for South Korea to pay more and also threaten to withdraw troops from South Korea. But the U.S. public is also not following there. Instead, we see something on the order of 69, 70% who want to either maintain or increase troops in South Korea, with only 13% calling for withdrawal. So the fact that the American public is largely rejecting President Trump's views on South Korea, I think is somewhat remarkable and really a testament to how long this alliance has lasted and a growing public knowledge in America of South Korea in general.
All right, Mr. Friedhoff, thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Dr. Kim, what do you think of Mr. Friedhoff's analysis? It seems like the meeting between President Moon Jae-in and President Donald Trump in the United Nations General Assembly meeting would be a turning point dealing with these issues?
Well, actually, there were good times and bad times for the alliance in our history. Unfortunately, this is not a good time because we have SMA issue as well as GSOMIA issue. A U.S. position is still, they're hoping that South Korea can change its position on terminating GSOMIA before November 24th. So if there's any misunderstanding on this issue, there should be some talks. If there's any way to get out of this situation throughout, bilateral cooperation, then certainly we should talk. And especially in October and November, we are going to have SCM, Security Consultative Meeting, and other related meetings between the two countries, U.S. and South Korea. We are going to announce a vision for a future alliance. So yes, it's a very critical moment.
I see. Another issue that gained fresh attention is whether North Korea and the United States will restart working-level talks in late September, when President Moon and President Trump will sit down for summit talks at the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. Here's more on the story.
There have been some nascent signs of dialogue between North Korea and the U.S., which remain at a stalemate since the breakdown in Hanoi. On September 9th, North Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee offered in a statement to hold working-level talks with the U.S. in late September. A few days later, on the 12th, U.S. President Donald Trump said he is willing to sit down with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for another round of summit sometime this year.
At some point, yes, he will. Certainly they want to meet. They'd like to meet. I think it's something that will happen, and we'll see. But Kim Jong-un, I think something can happen, yeah.
Meanwhile, there have been reports that Kim invited Trump to visit Pyongyang in a letter sent in August. The U.S. president said he's not yet ready to visit North Korea, but added the visit may happen in the near future. In a statement on September 16th, the North's foreign ministry demanded security assurances and sanctions relief, adding they can discuss denuclearization only when the threats and obstacles endangering the security and development of North Korea are removed. It also said it will resume negotiations with the U.S. in a few weeks. Meanwhile, President Moon Jae-in, who had played the facilitator role between North Korea and the U.S., vowed all-out efforts to help make progress in denuclearization talks.
곧 북미 실무대화가 재개될 것이며 남북미 정상 간의 변함없는 신뢰와 평화에 대한 의지는 한반도 평화 프로세스를 진전시키는 힘이 될 것입니다. 트럼프 대통령과 정상회담을 통해 북미 대화를 적극 지지하고 지원할 것입니다.
Trump announced in a tweet on September 18th that he will name hostage negotiator Robert O'Brien as his new national security advisor to replace John Bolton, whom he fired last week. O'Brien is an attorney with expertise in international security who has served in several State Department positions and worked with the UN. With the encouraging signs of dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington and Trump's appointment of O'Brien, the tension is turning to whether the two sides will finally return to the negotiating table, ending a months-long deadlock in nuclear talks.
There have been reports that Mr. Kim Jong-un of North Korea sent a personal letter to the White House in the United States asking for another person-to-person meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, probably in Pyongyang. What's behind all this personal letter and invitation?
Well, actually, as far as I believe, the personal relations between two leaders, Chairman Kim and President Trump, is a driving force to vitalize and revitalize the whole talks between the two countries.
They're in love, according to President Trump, right?
Well, yes, according to President
Right.
Trump. Well, but at the same time, President Trump wants to have a working level meeting. So there should be a working level meeting in the first place so that they can have substantive discussions about the next step. And after the Hanoi summit, returning to Washington without a deal was a political setback for President Trump, although he does not want to admit it, but that's the truth. So I think President Trump will not risk again that kind of political gambit.
Okay. We'll connect with another expert. Joining us on the line is Mr. Thomas Countryman, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Nonproliferation. Hello.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. It's a pleasure to appear on a quality news program on Arirang TV.
All right, very glad to have you on this program. First off, how are U.S. experts reacting to President Trump's firing of his national security advisor, John Bolton? It must have major implications for future nuclear talks with North Korea?
In general, experts in Washington are pleased that Mr. Bolton is no longer the national security advisor. He has a terrible record that has harmed American national security time and again, advocating for a senseless intervention in Iraq in 2003, pulling the U.S. out of multiple arms control treaties, trying to sabotage treaties in general. So the general reaction is one of relief. With respect to North Korea, it should be a positive sign, as Mr. Bolton was not only the one advocating for military action against North Korea, but also the one who insisted that there had to be one big comprehensive deal rather than a step-by-step process. And that's what led to the lack of success at the Hanoi summit. So it should be an encouraging move in terms of getting to a more rational, incremental policy of the United States towards the North Korean negotiations.
President Trump cited Bolton's mention of the Libyan model for North Korea as a mistake or a reason for getting rid of him. What message is Trump trying to send to North Korea with this move?
I don't think anyone can know exactly what message Mr. Trump is trying to send to any audience. But I think he looks to North Korea as the place where he can have a major foreign policy success before the 2020 election. And therefore, he reacts to Chairman Kim's flattery by continuing to speak positively of North Korea, minimizing the importance of the repeated missile testing, and by trying to keep alive the personal relationship that he believes is necessary in order to reach an agreement with the DPRK.
Mr. Countryman, do you see any chance for the U.S. government to offer sanctions relief on top of security guarantee? If so, do you think that's going to be a political achievement for President Trump ahead of his re-election?
I don't know the answer to that. In a rational world, a rational policy would offer both sanctions relief and some kind of security guarantee, or a combination of the two, according to how meaningful the next North Korean step would be. If there is a significant freeze of all activities at Yongbyon and nuclear activities that go further than Yongbyon, then in my view, it would be appropriate for the United States to offer sanctions relief and security guarantees in proportion to the steps taken by North Korea. Whether that is the president's approach at this time, we simply don't know.
All right, Secretary Countryman, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your analysis.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Well, Dr. Kim, Secretary Countryman is very critical of John Bolton's involvement in the North Korea policy. What do you see after he's gone?
Well, I think, this is my personal opinion,
right?
But asking North Korea to give up all WMD program is a non-starter at this point. Yes, for North Koreans. And it is also U.S. position that dismantling nuclear program is non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. So I think the two sides should have some kind of middle ground. And I think if the U.S. government is flexible in the future talks, then it is possible that it's going to start more fundamental issues rather than a comprehensive issues, and then move on to next issues that are of security concerns. Well, by doing so, I think the two sides can continue talks, which is very, very important. And at the same time, the U.S. government is very, very interested in what kind of security guarantee that North Korea wants from the U.S. In order to find out what that really means, there should be a talk between the two sides. I believe Minister Lee Young-ho will be in New York, so they are going to discuss the next step.
Okay. And the timing is coincided with the scheduled meeting between President Moon Jae-in of South Korea and President Donald Trump of the United States in New York.
Yes.
What are they going to discuss? More specifically, is President Moon Jae-in going to propose the resumption of operation of Kaesong Industrial Complex and the Mountain Ganga Tour program?
Well, it is not the right time to actually start talking about those sanctions relief before North Korea shows some, concrete ideas about the roadmap in the first place. I think South Korea's role can be suggesting some ideas to make some contribution to the dialogue between the two sides. Besides, North Korea wants to have a new round of talks, including so many concerns. Especially North Korea recently mentioned that all the obstacles that are threatening to its security and economic development should be removed. So the concerned parties are not just the U.S. or North Korea. It can include South Korea as well, because all the discussions can have an issue which can be directly affecting South Korea's national security as well. So I think South Korea's voice should be heard, and that is the moment where the U.S. President Donald Trump and South Korea's President Moon Jae-in will get together to have a talk.
So, like the Secretary Countryman's opinion, do you believe that the first move or first change has to come from North Korea?
Yeah, I think so. Although North Korea thinks that it is throwing a ball again in the U.S. court, but, well, it is North Korea to come up with a different idea.
Different idea from North Korea.
Because we don't know what North Korea wants.
Okay. All right, Dr. Kim, thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you for having me today.
This week's Bongzai is September 19th. When it is about North Korea, September 19th is not just another day. On September 19th in 2005, the six-party talks produced a landmark joint statement. In the joint statement, North Korea, for the first time, confirmed its commitment to abandoning all nuclear weapons and existing nuclear programs. In return, the United States declared that it has no intention to attack or invade North Korea. 13 years later, on September 19th in 2018, President Moon Jae-in of South Korea and Chairman Kim Jong-un of North Korea had their third summit meeting and signed the Pyeongyang Declaration. Both leaders and the First Ladies went to the top of Mountain Pact and raised their hands together in the blue sky. Let's hope that the Korean Peninsula will be a place of peace and reconciliation, free from the fear of nuclear weapons by the next September 19th. And that's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching.